I'm Emily, 32 years old, and I've spent my entire life being the daughter my parents forgot to love. Last October, I sent my family the most important invitation of my career, but my father's response was to laugh and call me just a lowly teacher. My sister said she was too busy because she had dinner plans, and my mother didn't even bother to type a reply. She simply liked my sister's message and moved on. I stared at my phone for a long time that night and finally typed back 3 words. That's fine. But what they didn't know, what none of them could have predicted, was that 48 hours later, my father would be sitting in a crowded restaurant scrolling his phone when his face would turn white as a sheet because on that screen, in front of millions of viewers, was me. 3 weeks earlier, I had finished cleaning my classroom at Jefferson Middle School, the place that had been my second home for 8 years, surrounded by thank you cards from students written in crayon, marker, and shaky pencil, when my phone buzzed and my mom called to excitedly tell me that my sister Victoria had just won a huge pharmaceutical lawsuit and that the family was planning a dinner to celebrate her success. Before I could share my own news, she rushed off the call, leaving me staring at the unopened envelope on my desk from the U.S. Department of Education. Inside was the invitation that would change everything. I had been selected as one of 4 finalists in the entire country for the National Teacher of the Year Award, a ceremony that would take place in Washington, D.C., presented by the Secretary of Education and broadcast live on national television. For a moment, I felt hope that maybe this time my family would finally understand, so I carefully wrote a message in the family group chat, explaining that I had been selected as a finalist and that the ceremony would mean a lot if they attended. I attached the official invitation with the government seal and waited. Hours passed. Then midnight came, and although all 3 of them had read the message, no one responded. The next morning, my father finally typed back 11 words. Just a lowly teacher's award. I'm not flying to Washington for that nonsense. My sister followed with a cheerful message saying she had dinner plans she couldn't cancel and ended it with a smiley emoji, while my mother simply liked Victoria's message without saying anything. I felt the same familiar ache I had carried since childhood, when Victoria's achievements were celebrated while mine were quietly dismissed. But instead of crying, I replied calmly, "That's fine, no worries," and decided I would go to Washington alone. That evening, my grandmother Martha called, the only person who sounded genuinely proud when she heard about my nomination, and she hinted that she knew more about the mysterious educator who had nominated me than she could say over the phone. A few days later, my parents invited me to Sunday dinner, where the entire evening revolved around celebrating Victoria's promotion to partner at her law firm with a 7-figure salary, while my own career as a teacher was mocked as small and meaningless. When I mentioned the ceremony again, they brushed it off as a cute little teacher appreciation event not worth attending, and my sister even laughed at my modest salary and the small apartment I lived in. The only person who quietly supported me that night was her husband Mark, who whispered that teachers mattered and that his own 3rd-grade teacher had changed his life. I left early for my flight to Washington, and the next day received an email from CNN asking for an interview because my nomination had attracted national interest. Soon, I was flying first class to Washington, staying at a historic hotel, meeting the other finalists, and realizing this ceremony was far bigger than anything my family had imagined. The program revealed that the guest of honor would be my grandmother Martha, a legendary educator who had transformed failing schools and personally nominated only 6 teachers in her entire career. When I found her in the hotel lobby, she finally confessed that she had been the one who nominated me after quietly following my career for years. The next evening, as the ceremony began in a grand ballroom with 2,000 guests and cameras broadcasting live across the country, I waited backstage while my family unknowingly celebrated my sister's promotion at an expensive French restaurant in Philadelphia, laughing about my so-called little ceremony. On stage, the Secretary of Education introduced the finalists and then invited a former student to speak about each teacher's impact. My former student, Marcus Thompson, walked to the microphone, now a pediatric surgery resident at Johns Hopkins, and told the audience how I had helped him when he was homeless at 16, buying him food, helping him apply to college, and believing in him when no one else did. The entire room stood in applause before the final announcement was made. Emily Carter from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, National Teacher of the Year. Cameras flashed as I walked to the stage to accept the crystal trophy while thousands of people applauded, and my grandmother cried in the front row. At that same moment, my father checked his phone in the restaurant and saw a CNN alert with my photo shaking hands with the Secretary of Education. Shock spread across the table as my parents and sister realized the ceremony they had mocked was actually one of the highest honors in American education, broadcast to millions of viewers. Later that night, I stood at the podium and gave a speech about teachers being told they were wasting their potential, about success not being measured by salary, but the lives we change, and I thanked my grandmother for believing in me when others didn't. The speech went viral, and suddenly my family faced calls and messages from friends asking why they hadn't been there. My sister tried to post a proud message online, but people quickly exposed how she had mocked my career earlier that same day, causing the situation to spiral into a public embarrassment for her. Weeks later, the consequences continued. As my father's friends questioned his absence, my mother faced uncomfortable conversations in her social circles, and my sister's professional reputation took a hit when her comments spread online. Eventually, I returned to my parents' house for a difficult conversation where I finally told them that after 32 years of trying to earn their respect, I was done seeking their approval. I set boundaries, explaining that I would only remain part of the family if I was treated with respect. Months later, my life had changed in ways I never expected. I moved into a larger apartment with the prize money, continued teaching the students I loved, spoke at national conferences, visited the White House, and watched my former student, Marcus Thompson, match into a prestigious surgical residency. My family still called occasionally, and one day my father sent a letter admitting he had been wrong about my career and apologizing for underestimating me. Reading that letter, I realized something important. 6 months ago, it would have meant everything, but now I already knew my worth. I had built a meaningful life, not through money or prestige, but through the lives I had touched, and that was more than enough.